Hello, Dan. Welcome back to this channel, and very excited to have you. I'm very excited, especially to have you back to talk about Dante, one of our favorite guys.
One of our favorite guys. Yes.
I've been looking forward to this video so much because for our viewers, I'm going to introduce this by saying I asked you, is there any canto of Purgatorio that you'd like to chat with me about later on, and you came up with Canto 27, which sounded, rang some bells in my mind. So I went to and double checked my notes and my old books, etc. And after 5 seconds that I was looking at it, I understood why you picked Canto 27, because I mean, somebody could potentially argue that is the best canto in Purgatorio, potentially. There could be a good argument for that. And every tercet is almost like, here we have Dante at the utmost height of his poetic powers. He has been writing a lot of the Divine Comedy already. He can come up with tercets in his vernacular automatically. That's even in speaking, that's something that people were saying at his times. So the language is not a problem anymore. His heart and brain are creating at the maximum of their skills, and it's visible. Of course, it translates into English to a certain degree. I'm following Mandelbaum. I don't know which translation have you been reading?
I have the Mandelbaum as well.
Excellent, excellent. And so I have a couple of introductory questions for you then about this canto, especially for people who maybe are not familiar with it yet, or maybe who haven't read it. My suggestion would be probably, if you're viewing this video, to quickly read the canto and then listen to our comments, of Dan's and my comments. The canto is the reason why many commentators say is so great is because it feels very light. It feels very light-hearted and fun and joyful, but it's got exactly the same level of depth and layers of the entire rest of the Divine Comedy. A good way, or maybe easy way, to break it down could be in 3 main portions. Okay. We have a very first one where Dante has to go through the purifying fire, and that's incredible in itself, just in itself. Then we have this nocturnal, very quiet moment when they sleep and Dante dreams, the 3rd dream in Purgatorio. And finally, we have Virgil's final monologue, which I'll ask some questions to you about. But it's maybe the most important moment in some respect, because if somebody is reading Purgatorio for the first time, the reader doesn't know that these are going to be the last spoken words by Virgil, right?
Yes. Yep.
Wow. So can I ask you again, on a high level, why you chose Canto 27 and what do you like best about it?
I chose Canto 27 because I concur with what you said before. I think this might actually be the most important canto in Purgatorio. And what I am most moved by, I think, and partly, and we talked about, in relationship to this exercise we did with my students, where we, literally climbed up, sort of like a Mount Purgatory near Baltimore. But it's so filled with so many wonderful facets of Virgil's relationship with Dante. It's all kind of condensed. It's like freeze-dried fruit, in a sense, that everything that Virgil has been and is still to Dante in terms of being his teacher, his coach, his father, is all expressed in some way in this canto. So it seems like the quintessential canto to describe the relationship between Dante and Virgil. And you had even said in our previous conversation that, and I really like this idea that, you know, in fact, one could probably argue in a pretty substantive way that the entire story on some fundamental level is about that relationship between Dante and Virgil. So that's why I chose it.
It's almost like a summary of their, to call it a friendship is to not do it justice enough. It's more than friendship, right? It's father son, it's coach and trainee. It goes beyond any type of strong relationship of love and guidance, beyond even a father. That's what Dante says, right?
Yes, yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you know, and Dorothy Sayers, actually one of her essays, has sort of suggested this, and I like the idea of it, that to think about this canto from Virgil's point of view is pretty interesting as a thought experiment, but it's also heart-wrenching to imagine this surrogate father who's very aware that his time with his son is not only limited, but is about to come to an end.
Right, right. He knows.
He knows.
And we get a lot of the Dante's feelings as the son, but we don't get a lot of insight into what Virgil himself is feeling, right?
We really do not. And one of the interesting things that I'm curious about what you think about, if you don't mind, if I throw a question back to you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
You know, we're like playing Dante catch here, you know, and so I'll throw the Dante, but I'll try to make it as clean a spiral as possible.
Right.
That I have, and I went back and looked, given all that you just reaffirmed right there. So I went back to look again, and you know how it is when you look at Dante again, you discover things that you had never noticed before or hadn't noticed in the same way. That I was trying to, given the gravity of this moment, essentially with the Pilgrim and Virgil, I was very struck by the fact that Dante the Pilgrim in Canto 27 never says a word to Virgil.
Oh.
And I went back to try to find what, because, you know, so much of this, and we're going to talk about this, you know, in a little while, about Virgil, the power of Virgil's final words to Dante. But I was curious to find exactly what the final words of the Pilgrim are to Virgil.
Oh.
And it goes all the way back to Canto 25, when he asks about how the body and the soul can, you know, how the emaciated body, given the fact that it doesn't really have a body like we have bodies now, you know, how it can work. And Virgil responds, but then passes it on to Statius in this powerful moment of, I'm turning my child over to you to get the birds and the bees discussion, you know, kind of thing, that Statius knows more, even though I have been the dad all along. And then Statius calls Dante his son twice, which is really, must have been really tough for Virgil to hear. So I'm curious about what you might think about why the Pilgrim is silent in this final canto.
That's a wonderful question. You know, many choices that Dante makes, I've noticed, in my personal opinion and view, they look like choices that he really thought carefully about, and certainly he did. But some others, especially as he progresses as a poet, I mean, he is the guy who actually wrote the Divine Comedy. So that's kind of, you know, and at this point, he's written about 70%, roughly speaking, of the entire, you know, the greatest book ever written, in my opinion. So he's there. I think he might have had some gut feelings, okay? And following this gut feeling, he knew that the right thing to do in this Canto 27 was for Dante to shut up. It's a gut feeling, meaning that also as a reader, when you realize the role that he's playing here, that of, like you say, of the child, of the everyman who is getting his last final lesson by the greatest friend he's ever had in his life. And it wouldn't almost make sense that he doesn't have anything to say. His role is not to speak. His role is to listen. His role is to take and understand, maybe feel some fear, but it's almost perfect. You know, he didn't need to think about the reasons why to make him not speak in the canto. It just had to be like that. It just had to be like that. And I think there are many elements in the Divine Comedy that work like that, in a way that maybe even Dante himself, as the genius that he was, didn't completely articulate in his mind, because they came together, you know?
Yes. So do you think that that's that what you just described there wonderfully, in my opinion, do you think that that silence on the part of the, you know, soon to be going to paradise Pilgrim without Virgil, do you think that's a sign of Dante the Pilgrim's maturation, that he is silent in the presence of this culminating thing?
I think so, for sure. It's almost like you know, the last moment before the final purification, and everything that follows from Canto 27 onward in the Divine Comedy is, yes, there is progress still for Dante, but not anymore progress in getting free from his dependencies, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's at this moment that he disconnects finally with that. Can you think of The Mission, the famous movie with Robert De Niro? The Mission was he was a priest, and he had this. It's just an example of a visual of somebody carrying a very big bag within himself, and the last moment when you let go, you know, when you let go of that bag and you become finally free of it, and you are sovereign of your own soul and of your own freedom. I
Right.
think it's perfectly explained in this canto.
Oh, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, it's so fascinating, isn't it? Because in Dante's The Pilgrim, you know, it's almost like there's the entire canto, the parentheses within the canto is when Virgil tries to get him to go through the fire, and he's frightened, understandably so, because fire can be pretty hot, you know, by definition. I mean,
not only that, but in reading that first part of the canto, you know what I was thinking of? I was thinking of Florence in 1300. I mean, not every single day, and maybe not every single week, but they actually burned people alive, yes. Right? So the screams of those people must have resonated around the town, even if you were in your bedroom trying to close your ears. Yeah. So he's more afraid than what we might be, because I've never seen somebody being burned alive, so I'm not afraid from experience, you know.
Correct. And one of the penalties, if he were to have ever returned to Florence, was that he was going to be burned at the stake. Exactly. So Virgil, the dad, who's got a 35-year-old 4-year-old at the time, has to kind of bribe him with, I think I see Beatrice's eyes already, and, you know, I can see it. And then at the end, he sort of affirms Dante as being the, you know, I crown and mitre you over yourself. So even within the whole canto, he's gone from sort of like almost a toddler to a full equal adult.
It's incredible how Virgil, from verse, roughly speaking, 19, 20, he gives something of a quick summary of what they've gone through together. because he recalls Geryon, he recalls, and he goes, remember, that in Italian is ricorditi. And I find it fascinating that the etymology of ricorditi comes from cor, which in Latin is your heart. So it means to take back inside your heart. And he repeats it twice. Isn't that great?
That's fabulous. I mean, so this idea of memorizing something by heart is etymologically connected to that word itself.
It is.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. That's wonderful. My goodness.
I love, and it makes me smile, how Virgil gives him all his, rational explanations, etc., and they do nothing. And then, and then when he says, "Well, actually, Beatrice is right there," okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's go. 1, 2, 3, break here. It's so can I ask you another question?
Please.
Okay, so, and I have been, not that I'm not putting a big bag on your shoulders here that you have to carry. So, but I have wondered about this ever since I first encountered it. And I still don't have in my own mind, I mean, I don't have an answer. I mean, I like questions that you don't have answers, but just more and more thoughtful responses. And so, but what I've always found interesting on line 127 and 128 in this canto, and you go over there and you look at the Italian, I find it interesting that in the Italian, the order of the syntax has my son at the end of the statement, yet Mandelbaum relocates it at the beginning of the statement in line 127, and then Virgil addresses the order of the trip in reverse, right? He doesn't say that you've seen the eternal fire and the temporary fire, which is what they've seen together, but then at this moment he inverts the trajectory of the journey, and I'm curious about why that. Does that matter? And if it does, what does it mean that he inverts the order?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I never even noticed that. It's a great notation here. You're right. In the Italian side, he says figlio as the end of his sentence. My son, you've seen. So it's like you've seen the temporary fire and the eternal fire, my son, in Italian. Yep. I think I agree with you that we would need to ask Dante, really to get to a 100% sure explanation. There is no lexical or Italian related reason that I can think of. So from that point of view, I don't know. But why is he mentioning the temporary fire, which is the one that they have in front of them, before mentioning their experience in hell?
Right.
I don't know. It's he's trying to address whatever is immediately there, and then remind him of the eternal fire. And you have reached the place past which my powers cannot see. And Dante doesn't say my powers. He says non discerno, which is his discernment, his understanding. It's also, to your point previously, great to see how self-aware Virgil is, and he's been from the very beginning. He knows exactly where his place is, what he can do for Dante, and what he cannot do for Dante, which is something else that can be extrapolated and say, well, that's really the best possible father or the best possible coach, the one who knows what he cannot teach, correct?
Yes. Well, that absolutely. I mean, I remember the really cool observation that Jennifer Brooks made when we got a chance to chat some time ago about the fact that what you get in Dante and then, but you're also getting the interpretation of the translator, right, at work.
Yes.
And Mandelbaum chooses to take that. Am I pronouncing it correctly? You said filio? It's
Yes,
not
filio.
okay. Filio, he relocates it at the front. That seems to almost highlight the paternal relationship with Dante and Virgil at this time. That the
Exactly.
Italian has it at the end of the sentence. Mandelbaum chooses to put it at the beginning, and that seems to be an important thing, although I don't know what Professor Mandelbaum would say about why he did that.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point to highlight. Thanks for making me think about it. I don't think there is a univocal way to see it or to answer it, but these are the never-ending opportunities to reflect on this work. Another point I wanted to highlight for you is, just before jumping into the fire or going through the fire, we already kind of notice that it's funny because Virgil, he gives him his rational explanation, doesn't work, and they say, hey, Beatrice is right there. And so it bribes him with this, just like a child, right?
Yes.
And then right after that, what happens is there is this extremely delightful moment that is almost comedic or lighthearted, where Virgil shakes his head and looks at Dante and goes, so what now? You want to stay there? That's one of the best moments of the entire canto. And I'm not making it up. I mean, I'm not really coloring it, because that's precisely what Dante says. Let's get back to that. He says on verse 43, Ond'ei crollò la fronte e disse, come? Volenci star di qua? Which is obviously a joke. He's joking with him. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's another example, and I'm sure there's scholars, because they've been 700 years of practice, right? That part of Virgil's pedagogical strategy sometimes that can be risky, right, as a teacher too, is he often uses this sort of rhetorical question device, and this seems to me to be kind of like you emphasize, well then, what's wrong with you? How come you're not going to come? I mean, this is obvious. And he does it in a few other places, in Inferno and in Purgatorio as well. And it's partly, it's playful exasperation.
Yeah. And right after this little joke, he also, Dante says, then Virgil smiled as one smiles at a child fruit has beguiled.
Yes.
And so, like you were saying before, right, Dante really is playing the role of the child here, and almost getting his entire Virgil education in just one single canto, from child to where he is now. Yes. And the pomo that is referring to here, I've read some commentators saying that he's referring to a much deeper theological matter that Dante had explained a few cantos ago in Purgatorio, of the human desire, the desire that keeps growing. So the little child wants first a little thing, and then a thing that is a little bit bigger, and then an apple. And that apple is the symbol of our desire, always wanting something bigger, and always wanting to go beyond whatever, never being able to stop on one earthly thing.
And do you think that even Virgil is almost aware that to get Dante to come through the fire, it's like he's going to have to serve his son, he's going to have to serve him a spinach smoothie, so he slices an apple into the smoothie in order to get him to. That's
a perfect example. That's exactly what's happening here. Is and this, I think, it's a great opportunity to kind of open up the real big topic that Dante is talking about here, which is, in my opinion at least, freedom.
Yes.
freedom. What do we mean with freedom today, and what did Dante meant with freedom? Do you want to comment quickly about that?
I mean, I think that's just the sort of the quintessential question, right? Because Virgil at the beginning tells Cato that Dante goes seeking liberty. And then here in this canto, Virgil sort of crowned Dante, telling him that free, whole, and upright is your will. Like, you're now free. And it's even when he has three dreams, right, in the story, and this is the only dream, the third dream, where he's literally free to wake up on his own. He's not awakened by something terrifying in the dream.
Oh, that's true.
He wakes up, you know, like we wake up, you know, like, you know, like some kind of Zen Buddhist alarm clock, that all of a sudden the sun's coming up and he wakes up with the sun, you know. He doesn't have to he finally has a good night's sleep.
Yes, yes,
You know?
yes, spontaneously. He's relaxed. He's relaxed.
He's relaxed. And maybe wouldn't that be nice if serenity was a critical component to liberty?
Oh my God, that's such a great point. I think it is. I really, really think it is. When I think about my own spiritual life as a Christian and my prayer life, if there's no at least a little bit of serenity, everything becomes more difficult, and everything becomes just postponed, you know, because you have to deal with whatever you have to. So you have Dante at the very beginning of Inferno, Canto 1 of Inferno, who is the antithesis of free. He's not a free man. He's the opposite of free. But again, looking at freedom in the modern sense, we're not saying that at the beginning of Inferno, Dante is not free in the sense that he's got some external factor blocking him from doing stuff. It's all inside. It's all inside. And that's what I mean when I try to interpret what Dante really is getting at here for our life, is that sense of freedom from internal dependencies, from internal hindrances that we create from ourselves, because we're all children from a spiritual standpoint. We are attracted by a lot of beautiful things in life that pull us in many different directions. And those are the things that can hinder our freedom, no?
Yeah, I mean, that's beautifully said. And what was kind of cool, what you did right then, when you were describing the sort of, you know, a little bit about your own reflection on this, you used the key phrase from Inferno 1, because you said our life. Our life.
It's about us. Exactly.
It's about us, you know, and that's a wonderful thing to think about, how, you know, what the real things that seem to get in our way are that our main shackles are internal.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And continue. I mean, even the gospel, right? Even like Luke's gospel says, you know, has Jesus say that the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Absolutely. I can, you know, since we're throwing balls at each other here, Dan, I'm going to throw another gospel quotation at you.
I'll try to catch it. I'll try to catch it.
You're making me think of St. Paul in the Acts of Apostles, where, was it I'll find out where it is, but he actually said famously that he about himself, he said, I know what's good, but I don't do it. I know what's good, but I don't do it. And that's the lack of freedom that we all of us sinners suffer from. Because if we were really free, the good, the divine good, the utmost good would be in line, exactly in line with what we actually want to do every day of our life.
That's very well said. I mean, that's Augustine's thing, love and do what you want. And Virgil says, let pleasure be your guide now.
that's the whole point of the canto. So there we get, you know, really to the final and probably most important line of the entire canto 27, which is perch'io te sovra te corono e mitrio. The Italian is interesting because it's a little unusual expression, you know, te sovra te. He is playing with alliteration, he's playing with repetition in the entire canto, and here in particular with saying, I crown you above yourself. How do you read that sentence? What would you explain it to somebody who reads it for the first time?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm still in the process of journeying towards freedom, towards seeing this in a better way. I think today that that what Virgil is, I mean, Virgil doesn't have the authority to make this happen for Dante, but it seems like he's acknowledging for Dante that on some fundamental level, he is now, and this doesn't remove the reality of God's role, but that he is now the authority of his own life and must therefore, I love the fact that the word author is the main word in authority. And so going to paradise is sort of writing yourself to wholeness.
Ah, I love that. The sense of creating,
Yes.
of being the and so how different is this concept of freedom from the stereotypical concept of freedom that you might get if you ask an average student of today's world? It's a little different, isn't it? Because their mind would probably fly to the practical freedom from obstacles, from oppression, no?
Yes, and I guess our, you know, we learned from Statius, right, when he describes to Dante and Virgil about why there was the earthquake. It's because he experienced, it was a celebration, the mountain starts to shake and everybody starts singing, you know, glory be to God, because he's been liberated because of his freedom. God doesn't come down and say, okay, Statius, you've done your time, but it's his own will that recognizes it's time for him to move. So that sense of freedom that's affirmed here, as well as Statius talks about, that's a pretty heavy lift to cultivate that kind of liberty. There's nothing facile about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about your thoughts on Dante's dream? You know, what he actually dreams?
You know, I've tried to read a little bit about this, and I had a wonderful young woman whose name was Leah in class about 30 years ago, who was a wonderful young fellow pilgrim on the road. And I've also had a Rachel in class. So I've had the dream alive in my classroom. So I was pretty lucky. But I like, and I hope, and I don't know. I mean, I only have responses, but I'd like to think that serenity and liberation that can weave in and out of one another in a meaningful way includes embracing both action and reflection, which I think those two women seem to suggest that they are signifying while Dante is at night school, right? The curriculum, that, you know, one is sort of picking flowers and one is looking at her reflection. And if we can integrate both of those in our lives, then it seems like we are cultivating something important in ourselves.
Yeah, from the, you know, let's say the couple of things that I read as well about this allegory wrapped into a symbol, wrapped into a metaphor.
Yes.
I think that's exactly what he's aiming at, and he's telling us of these two different approaches to life, to existence, the active one and the spiritual one, which is also then reflected in the gospel itself with Martha and Mary. the
Oh,
Martha
yeah, yeah.
Martha episode,
Oh, that's great.
and even
Never thought about that. I like that. Wow.
and even beyond that, in the Divine Comedy, it's fairly clear in the next cantos that are coming in Purgatorio that one is the first woman that Dante is gonna meet in the Garden of Eden, the active one, and the other one will be Beatrice, because there is a sense of higher importance for Dante's life, and I think for every man's life, of the contemplative side versus, they're both very important, but I think the spiritual and contemplative one, doesn't it take a slightly higher importance for Dante, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and when you were talking, it just made, hey, I hadn't thought about the fact that literally never, and that's one of the nice things about getting to chance to have this kind of conversation with you. You know, it doesn't matter how many years you've read it. It's about the fact, I've never thought about the fact that two women in the dream, and then within a pretty quick a period of time, there are going to be two women in his actual, you know, life there at the top of the mountain that are going to have two different kinds of roles for him. And all I could think about was, you know, Ebenezer Scrooge, you know, is, you know, has these three ghosts come to him while he's asleep. And so he has kind of a nocturnal contemplative experience. And then the first thing he does when he wakes up is he buys Bob Cratchit's family a turkey.
That's true. Yeah, I remember that scene. That's
so
and that proves the fact that dreams can really inform your waking life very, very well, right?
that's for, and sometimes it's can be an uncomfortable source of information.
Yes, yes,
too, for sure.
Well, and then, you know, finally back to Virgil. It's you know, let's think about people who haven't read the whole Purgatorio yet. You get here, you get to the end of this canto, you hear him make his monologue very passionate. And also there is this moment that really hit my imagination. Just before starting to speak, Dante says, Virgil set his eyes insistently on me. This is a translation that Mandelbaum uses, but in Italian, Dante says, in me ficcò Virgilio gli occhi suoi. E ficcare is when you put a nail in a hole, you know? So that's the intensity.
Wow.
That's the intensity of how intense Virgil's gaze is into Dante in that moment.
That is fact. That is, I mean, that is just a fabulous point.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful.
And so you have the monologue, and then what happens is maybe you can share a couple of words of what we're going to see in the next cantos, right? Basically, Virgil and Statius, they continue to follow Dante until for a couple of cantos, until there is the next guide. You know, it's almost as if Virgil wants to make sure that this passage takes place, no?
Yeah, and isn't that such a lovely sort of parental moment where it's, because I used to be a camp counselor back when I was younger, and part of the challenge was, you know, the kids would be crying because they were going to leave mom and dad, and then they would, you know, within about 30 seconds, they would be, you know, giggling and laughing with all the other kids. And then the parents, instead of getting in the car and leaving, they would hide behind a tree just to make sure that all was right with their child. And Virgil does that. He doesn't just exit, he sticks around.
I wouldn't discard that in Canto 30, when Dante turns around and he sees that Virgil has gone, which is so moving and touching, I wouldn't discard the possibility that Virgil is actually hiding behind a tree in the Garden of Eden, just looking at his pupil, you know, with all his love. It's just so incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's you know, it's one of those goosebump moments, right? I mean,
yes, here really is, I'm telling you, it's really the height of Purgatorio, and this is why it's my favorite cantica. I love, of course, all three of them, but this one is my absolute favorite.
I would agree, and as I think you, I mean, Dorothy Sayers says that Purgatorio sort of calls us with chords of love. You know, that we're all, you know, it really pulls us in because it's more and more about us, right? We're in big sky country. We're in temporal time, just like Dante is, and we're living in temporality, just like the Pilgrim is in that section.
Yes, yes, yes.
So,
I love the fact that you are mentioning, Dorothy, say if there's any kind of titles of specific books, you know, that you might, maybe you can share with me later, and I will put them in the description for people to look up, you know, check out.
I will absolutely. I'll email you some titles that I think are pretty useful and pretty accessible also for people,
Yeah,
without a doubt.
it's you know, Dan, it's almost 45 minutes, and you know, we could do maybe 10 times roughly speaking this period of time to talking about Canto 27. We could make it like a daily call.
Well, this has been, once again, thank you. This has been one more huge special treat in my Dante journey to spend time with you and Jennifer, and then to get to talk about Canto 27. Because what I'm going to do now when we hang up is I'm going to reread Canto 27. You know, I mean,
I'm probably going to do the same on my side. And I hope these thoughts and exchanges we had were useful to whoever is watching us, you know, in these days, or maybe 100 or 200 years in the future.
Down the road, exactly. Well, Tom, thank you very, very much, and good luck with your finding as you build your new home out there, and congratulations on 10 years of sharing your life.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time. Thank you, Dan.
Take care. See you.
Good to have you again.
Bye-bye.